Okay, well, according to my clock, it's just turned 1 o'clock. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Nicholas Bradley, and I'm a member of the Department of British and American Studies here at NUFS. On behalf of the Centre for Language Education and Development and the teachers within it that help organise this event, I'd like to welcome you to the 2023 Teacher Development Symposium. This is our third annual event since we decided to use the momentum generated by our in-house professional development sessions. Annual event that allows teachers from our university and from other universities around Japan, as well as the world, as the case has become, to present their research practices, ideas and thoughts on language education. Now I'd like to give a quick word about the structure of the event. We will have 3 Zoom rooms in operation today. This is the main room, and it will host our 2 invited guest speakers. Rooms 1 and 2 will host concurrent sessions in between and after the guest speaker talks. Presentations in room 1 are those that have been identified by their presenters as being more practice orientated, and those in room 2 being more research orientated. Unfortunately, one presenter isn't available to join us today, so there will be a free period prior to our second guest speaker presentation. You can see on the schedule. The main room, this room, will remain open throughout the day. So if you wish to continue a discussion after a presentation in rooms 1 or 2, please feel free to come back to here and continue it. If there are 2 presentations that you want to see, but which are not, but which are on at the same time, the majority of presentations will be recorded and made available on our website a few days after this event. So we hope you enjoy the event and find it useful. Okay, let me introduce our first guest speaker. Donna Tatsuki AD is Professor Emerita at Kobe City University of Foreign Studies. Her research interests include the teaching of pragmatics, best practices in language teaching materials, representations of gender and ethnicity in government-approved language textbooks, and descriptions of ELF-driven multi-party talk in interaction in model United Nations simulations. She's the editor of more than a dozen books, including 2010's Pragmatics, Teaching Speech Acts, 2011's Pragmatics, Teaching Natural Conversation, and last year's Innovations in Teaching of Pragmatics. She has served as editor of JALT Journal and founded the Pragmatic Resources series for the JALT Pragmatics Special Interest Group. And she is currently serving as a scientific committee member for New Perspectives, a journal of TESOL, Italy. Today, Professor Tatsuki will talk to us about the importance of pragmatics in language education and give guidelines for language teachers in creating L2 pragmatics instructional materials. Professor Tatsuki, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for a very kind introduction. And so greetings, everybody. I hope that you're doing well in your part of the country. It's drizzling rain here in Kobe, where I'm situated. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, here we go. Okay, as Nicholas mentioned, the incorporating pragmatics into language education, why and how, that's my topic for today. And I hope that I can get through all of the things that I have prepared for today. Usually I do a 14-week session for Tsuda University as a guest. And so I've extracted some of the things from that series, but in 90 minutes, 45 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes, we'll see how much I can get through. So we're going to start with the why question first. And so think about this for a second. Have you ever worried about finding a sensitive way to say something? And this could be just in your own life, or when you are preparing students to go out into the big world. Have you ever worried about the things that they have, need to say? Can you recall any situations in which something was said that seemed rude or inappropriate or unexpectedly hurtful or strangely aggressive? And also, are you satisfied with the way that textbook deals with learners trying to speak politely and appropriately? And so, if you answer any of these questions, maybe, affirmatively, maybe this topic will be good for you. Okay, let's get how come this is not moving forward? Okay, there we go. All right, so why is the learning of pragmatics important? We all are trying to develop communicative competence in our learners, right? But pragmatics for a long time was really neglected from the idea of communicative competence. In fact, Widdowson even called it the wastebasket of applied linguistics. And it was because for a long time, they didn't know where to place pragmatics, in fact. The other thing to think about why it's important to talk about pragmatics is that speech communities differ in their assessment of speakers and hearers' social distance. And what we mean by that is, depending on the context that you are in, depending on the people you are talking to, depending on the purposes of your interaction, there might be different rules at play. The way that you would talk to someone in a business setting might be very different from the way that you would interact with a family during a homestay situation, right? So of course, that makes perfect sense that you need to calibrate according to the situation. The third point is saving face and so on is something that is a universal issue. Now, how we do it and when we do it and so on might vary culturally, but pragmatic errors are commonly not seen as just deficiencies in L2 knowledge, but they are seen as personal defects. So in other words, they will forgive you for a grammatical error. They might even think it's cute when you make a grammatical error, but when you make a pragmatic error, they're not sure whether it's truly an error or a mistake, or if you in fact are not a nice person, right? So that's another part of this puzzle. And finally, pragmatic knowledge gives the learners a sense of ownership of the language, and they feel like they're full members. Students in general really want to fit in and do well. They don't want to make these kinds of errors. And also, it's a very interesting part of language learning. This little model here, I like this because it shows the various areas of communicative competence. And most of us, when we do our training, we're really focusing on the semiotic competence. We're looking at the linguistic side. We're, teaching vocabulary, we're teaching grammar, we're worried about word formation, all those kinds of things. And then as teachers, we might develop some work on strategic competence, what to do in what situation, how to deal with communication breakdowns, and so on. Sociocultural competence, of course, is, again, adjusting according to the social variables, the cultural variables that are in front of us. Well, when you put all of these together, you realize that pragmatic competence is right at the heart of all three of these areas. And so why teach pragmatics again? One thing is that it is possible to teach these things. It's not something that you have to just expose people and let them pick up. Explicit instruction rather than implicit instruction is very effective. So it's worth preparing materials. And finally, students perceive a need to do it. They want to learn, and they can enjoy learning pragmatics. This is another, array to think about what the components of pragmatic competence are. And so if we start at the top, 12 o'clock of the clock here, context is one of the most familiar aspects of pragmatic competence. So context would be, where are you? What time is it? Who are the people you are talking to? For what purpose is this conversation or interaction going on? So all of those kinds of things need to be established and understood, because they will affect perhaps how you express yourself. The second one, interlocutor status, that's all about, is the person your peer, or is the person your senior, or is the person, a junior to you? That might affect the way that you express yourself, or how direct or indirect you need to be. Register is all about whether you are being formal or informal. So, if you're just out with a group of friends, of course, the register can be very different from if you have a interview with your boss, for example. The cross-cultural differences, we're all aware of those, that, how to be polite in a different language might not be exactly the same as in English. And a lot of Japanese speakers of English have the misapprehension that Japanese is a more polite language than English. And in fact, Japanese language does do politeness in very special ways, but English also has complex rules for politeness, just they do it differently. And so we have to, appreciate the different ways that politeness is expressed. Semantics and syntax, of course, there are certain formulas that we can use in certain situations. And that's very helpful for learners, because if they learn certain formulas, that gives them a head start on being able to express themselves, with confidence. Utterance, interpretation, and inferences, these are kind of flip sides of the same thing. So how you say something is going to be interpreted by another person. So, of course, you're going to try to use the most conventional way to express things the way you want to express them. But of course, it's always subject to, someone understanding it in a different way than you anticipated. So, the learners need to become aware of how their utterances could be interpreted depending on their tone of voice, depending on the, which word in the sentence they stress, and all sorts of different things. And then finally, nonverbal communication, because it's not just what we say, but how we say it, and maybe the way our, expression is on our face when we say it, that is going to make some kind of a difference. Some people say, well, what's the difference between semantics and pragmatics? What's the difference between the meaning and what pragmatics would stand for? And it's pretty easy distinction. Semantic information is encoded in what is uttered. So, the meaning, the direct meaning, you can decode exactly the meaning of words. However, pragmatic information is extra-linguistic. It is above and beyond the actual forms that are available. And so, the semantic information is encoded in what you say. The pragmatic information is generated, or at least made relevant, by the actual act of speaking. And so this is going to come clearer in a few minutes. So just think of the word awesome. We've heard the word awesome in conversations many times, probably. But just think, the word awesome can take on different meanings depending on who's saying it. So if you take a look at the couple that's on the left-hand side, we've got the guy saying, "You look awesome." And what he means, of course, is you look hot. And you can tell, she's smiling and putting her best foot forward and so on. The two guys at the back, they're holding up their beers and saying, this beer is awesome. Well, probably if they're North Americans, it's because it's a nice cold beer and it's a hot summer day, although different parts of the world don't drink cold beer. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. In the case of the two women on the right-hand side, the lady says, this weather is awesome. And in that case, she's probably saying that the weather is mild. It's neither hot, it's neither cold. It's just right. Okay. So just think, you're using the same word, but it's taking on different meanings because of where you are, who you're talking to, in what circumstance. So how do we teach pragmatics? Well, there's lots of areas in pragmatics, but three of the most common areas are speech acts, conversational implicature, and talk as interaction. And actually the list is much larger than this, but these are the ones that I'm going to focus on today because probably they're the most useful and easiest to get into. So let's see. Oopsie doo-dah. Boom, boom. There we go. Let's understand speech act theory.
J.L. Austin was an early 20th century British philosopher of language. In his best-known work, How to Do Things with Words, Austin pointed out that we use language to do things as well as to assert things, and thus called his philosophy speech act theory. He classified speech according to intention and coined 4 key terms we'll define in this video. The most important takeaway from Austin's theory is the understanding that to speak is to act. This way of thinking about speech is important because it provides insight into the utility of human communication, namely that humans use communication as a tool to further their own ends. Utterance. J.L. Austin's first term is utterance, and utterance by itself has no particular meaning. It's merely a string of words. Look at this example from everyday life. Propositional utterance. Austin's second key term is propositional utterance. A propositional utterance is one that contains a reference to something else. Look at this example from everyday life. Coffee. Elocutionary utterance. Austin's third key term, elocutionary utterance, means to speak with the intention of interacting with the receiver. Thus, an elocutionary utterance must be one said to another person. Here is another example from everyday life. I'm tired. Paralocutionary utterance. Austin's fourth key term is paralocutionary utterance, which means to speak with the intention of affecting the behavior of the receiver. Thus, this utterance is explicitly tied up in speaking to another person and seeking to influence them. For example, take a look at this sermon, an explicitly paralocutionary genre. The reason why they are not fallen already and do not fall now is only that God's appointed time is not come. For it is said that when that due time or appointed time comes, their foot shall slide. Then they shall be left to fall as they are inclined by their own weight. God will not hold them up in these slippery places any longer, but will let them go. These categories are helpful when thinking about the ways that humans interact with each other and with their environments through language. When speaking to and around others, more often than not, we humans are in fact attempting to affect the behavior of others. These categories are useful, but is there a way in which all of these utterances can be interpreted as paralocutionary? That is, could all of them be reinterpreted as seeking to affect the behaviors of others? I'm tired. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this too loud? Won't you just turn it off and come to bed? Did the main character's original utterance, I'm tired, encapsulate her later request that her partner come to bed? In this way, was the original illocutionary utterance, in fact, a paralocutionary one? Coffee. Do many seemingly innocent statements, in fact, seek to elicit a change in the behavior of those around the speaker? You look like you're having a bad day. Would you like this extra donut I have? Do our most basic utterances actually have deeper intentions that seek to affect the way we interact with other people? Did all of the original utterances contain the paralocutionary intent from the beginning, even in the shortened version first shown? These scenes provoke bigger questions about rhetoric and the coercive nature of all speech acts. For example, are all utterances paralocutionary? Is all language rhetorical?
Okay. Okay, so there are lots of different speech act categories. There's representatives, directives, commissives, expressives, and declarations. And mostly we focus on directives and commissives in particular, and expressives, the middle ones. So the directives would be things like asking, commanding, inviting, requesting. Commissives might be promising, swearing, guaranteeing, pledging. Expressives would be things like apologizing or expressing regret or thanks and greeting and so on. So let's take a look at speech act requests, for example. So when you're asking for something, you're asking somebody to do something, a request is understood as being face-threatening or potentially face-threatening because the speaker is actually going to infringe upon the recipient of the request, the person who's being requested, their freedom from imposition. And so if you're a competent requester, you might hesitate making the request, or you're going to try to make sure that you can convey to the person that this request is not going to be too much imposition, or you're going to acknowledge, how much trouble you think the request is going to be, all those kinds of things. And so the person who's receiving the request, of course, is going to be aware of how well this request is done. So there's lots of different ways to do requests. You could use direct strategies like give me the book. Those are going to be the ones that may be between the closest people. Conventionally indirect strategies could be things like, could you give me the book? Would you mind giving me the book? And then non-conventionally indirect strategies or hints, depending on the situation. You might say, well, I feel better when I hold a book, right? And so you're hinting that you want to have the book. Also, we have at our disposal mitigation and softening strategies as well. So for example, if you're having lunch with your boss, you'd be less likely to say pass the salt than please pass the salt. You'd probably err on the side of being a little bit more polite. So the word please softens or mitigates the direct request. Yeah. Other examples are things like, do you think I could? I was wondering if you could, or it would really help if you, and so on. So those are kinds of softeners and mitigators. Here's an example of when, if you start with an indirect request and then maybe it's not initially understood. So let's see if I can get this to play.
Want to get that? Not particularly. Did you get that?
suppose I could if I were asked.
Would you please get back?
Of course. Why do you have to make things so complicated?
And so, of course, he had to work his way to much more direct. Okay, so here are the direct ones. Just the plain one be give me the book, more polite, please give me the book, and softer, even more polite, direct. If possible, please give me the book for a second. Here are indirect ones. You can look at ability, possibility, willingness. Can you give me the book? Could you give me the book? Do you think you could perhaps give me the book? And so on, if you take a look. And the willingness, will you give me the book? Would you give me the book? Do you think you might maybe give me the book? So there's lots of different ways to express this. And then the hints, do you have the book? Was it you that had the book? Did you by any chance happen to have the book? And so on. So there's all of these strategies. Let's move on now to conversational implicatures. And this is the cooperative principle and Grice's maxims. Paul Grice talked about these maxims in 1975. The maxim of quantity, say enough, but not too much. So for example, if someone was to say, do you have the time? Meaning they want to know what time it is. If you were to just say yes, you're not actually answering with enough quantity. You would be asked to answer, yes, it's 1:15 or 1:25, okay? The maximum of quality, you should speak the truth. And however, there are times when we don't speak the truth. When our friend says, does this dress make my butt look big? You might lie and say, oh no, it looks wonderful, right? We have the maxim of relation or relevance, be relevant, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then the maxim of manner, be brief, orderly, and avoid obscure expressions. Now, of course, parents break this rule all the time. So for example, if you're trying to keep a secret from your children, you might spell out a word like, if the kids are good, maybe later we'll go out for ICECREAM, and if the kids can't spell, they don't know what the treat is. Oops. Okay. Here we go.
My name is Will Salmon, and I'm an assistant professor of linguistics at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. Today, I'm going to talk to you about different kinds of linguistic meaning, specifically about conventional implicature and conversational implicature. One way of dividing up linguistic meaning that's been very influential over the last 40 years or so, which grew out of the work of the Oxford philosopher Paul Grice and his notions of conversational implicature and conventional implicature. So a good starting place for us is to notice that there's often a difference between what a speaker says and what a speaker means. Take the sentence, I'm tired. Someone asks you to go out on a date and you say, I'm tired, as a response to them. The linguistic meaning of what you have said is just that you were tired. That is, the meanings of the words I, am, and tired are taken literally, combined into a sentence, and give you the straightforward meaning simply that you are tired. And that's all that you have said, taken literally. However, you've likely conveyed much more than this to the person who asked you out on the date. You most likely conveyed to the person that you don't want to go out on a date with them. So the linguistic meaning here would be that you were tired, while the speaker meaning would be what you really intended to convey to the person, namely that you don't want to go out on the date. So you've turned down the invitation in a kind of an indirect way. This is what Grice would have called a conversational implicature. So conversational implicatures are messages that speakers convey that are often above and beyond the literal meaning of the words that they speak. The trick to it all is the speakers hope to get hearers to recognize their intention in speaking, even if this intention doesn't line up directly with the words that a speaker speaks. So in uttering a sentence, I hope to get my hearer to recognize what my purpose is in uttering it. If I say I'm tired in response to an invitation, I hope that my hearer will ask herself why I'm telling her that I'm tired. And as a result, I hope that she'll infer that I don't really want to go out on the date. So we now have two potential messages here. The first message is the literal meaning of the sentence, I'm tired. The second message is the implied meaning, that I don't want to go on the date. Now, the first of these meanings is what we call conventional meaning, or linguistic meaning. That is, it's attached directly to the meanings of the words in question. The second meaning, which is the implied meaning, is non-conventional. By this, I mean that the second meaning isn't attached to the meanings of the words, I'm tired. So if I say I'm tired in another context, it won't count as turning down a date. For example, I could say I'm tired late at night in order to imply that I'm ready to go to bed. Or I could say I am tired first thing in the morning in order to imply that I don't want to get out of bed. Or maybe I'm in an argument with someone and I could say I am tired in order to imply that I don't want to argue it anymore. In all the cases, I will just have said literally that I'm tired, but I might have implied different things in all the cases. So you can use the same sentence to imply many different things in many different contexts, and the implied meaning is non-conventional. Now, philosophers and linguists often talk about the truth conditional meaning of sentences. Now, this is a kind of meaning that's directly part of the literal meaning of a sentence, and it's what's used to determine whether a sentence is true or not. So for the sentence, I'm tired, this sentence will be true if and only if I am actually tired. The truth conditional meaning of this sentence is not necessarily a part, then, of the implied meanings we've discussed so far. So if I say I'm tired to imply that I don't want to go on a date, the truth conditions still just depend on whether or not I'm actually tired. The part about not wanting to go on the date doesn't factor into the truth conditions of I'm tired. So the conversational implicature meaning, the part about not wanting to go on the date, isn't truth conditional. So let's sum up what we've got so far. We have truth conditional meaning, which is literal and conventional, and we have non-truth conditional meaning, which is implied and non-conventional. This basic distinction takes us a long way toward understanding the kinds of meaning that we find in everyday language. But there's one other dimension of meaning, which is also very important. This is the conventional implicature meaning. And this kind of meaning seems to sit midway between the two kinds of meaning we've discussed so far. That is, conventional implicature is conventional. It's part of the direct, actual, literal meaning of the words of question. But at the same time, it's not truth conditional. So let's look at an example. Think about a sentence like, John is short, but he is strong. This sentence is equal in terms of truth conditions to John is short and he is strong. As long as John is both short and strong, both sentences are true. If he's not both short and strong, then both sentences are false. There's no in between here. But the question is, what does the but sentence have that the and sentence is lacking? And the difference seems to be in there being some kind of contrast in the but sentence that's not present in the and sentence. And this contrast is between the expectations we have about being short and about being strong. So maybe we don't normally think of someone who is short as also being strong or something along these lines. In any case, there's a contrast there between these two parts of the sentence. Now, this contrast is clearly part of the conventional literal meaning of but. If we substitute and for but, we can see that the truth conditions stay the same. But now the contrast is gone. So the contrast must be a conventional part of the meaning of but. At the same time, though, the contrast is not part of truth conditional meaning. We know this because the and but sentences we just mentioned have the same truth conditions, but only one of the sentences has the actual contrasting feature. So Grice called this kind of conventional but non-truth conditional meaning a conventional implicature. They're found all over everyday language. For example, sentences like, frankly, the Vikings didn't win, or those darn Vikings lost the game, are used to express truth-evaluable statements as well as a speaker's attitudes toward the statements. Consider the second sentence, those darn Vikings lost the game. Here, a speaker's made a simple claim about the Vikings losing a game. The speaker has also conveyed an emotion toward that claim, namely that the speaker is frustrated or angry over the Vikings having lost. This communicated emotion is important in helping us understand the speaker's feelings, but it's not important to the truth conditions of the claim. All that matters to the truth conditions is whether or not the Vikings lost the game. So this kind of emotive meaning is directly associated with the word darn, that is, its conventional meaning, but it doesn't enter into the truth conditions of the sentence. As a result, we can talk about the meaning of this word and many, many related words in terms of conventional implicature. To finish here, we've now discussed three dimensions of meaning. There's conventional truth conditional meaning, which is very close to the literal meaning of what is said. There's also the non-conventional implied meaning, which would be conversational implicature, and which is potentially quite far from the literal meaning of what is said. And finally, there's conventional non-truth conditional meaning, which would be the conventional implicature that we just discussed. So there we have, in short, an introduction to three different dimensions of linguistic meaning, a set of distinctions which is very useful in fields like philosophy and linguistics, or really in any field in which it's necessary to understand the relation between language and how we use language to communicate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so here's just an example of relevance in vocabulary choice, you know. And so she said, like, he has carved the turkey, but he used the wrong meaning of carve. When I asked you to carve it, this is not what I had intended, okay? So that's an example. Let's move on now to the final part. Speech and talk is not the same as conversation. We can speak about talk as interaction, talk as transaction, and talk as performance. So talk as performance could be things like speech making, doing lectures, you know, that kind of usually one way, you know, interact. It's not an interaction really. Talk as transaction is when you're trying to get things done, like when you go to a shop and you're buying things, or you're, you know, asking for, usually you're interacting with people with whom you don't have any kind of a relationship, okay, beyond customer and clerk or something like that. Talk as interaction, however, is much more complex because it's all about building social relationships as well as passing information. So the main features of talk in interaction is that it has a primary social function. It reflects roles and relationships and identities. It could be formal or casual, and it uses lots of conversational conventions. So and it's jointly constructed. Now, this last part of joint construction is very important because back channeling, aizuchi, those kinds of things are very important in a jointly constructed conversation. So this is a 2-minute long scene from Big Bang Theory. And if you notice from the 1-minute point, they start to jointly construct their conversation.
First, there was PlayStation, aka PS1. Then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4. And that makes sense. You'd think after Xbox, there'd be Xbox 2. But no. Next came Xbox 360. And now, after 360, comes Xbox One. Why one? Maybe that's how many seconds of thought they put into naming it.
Can you get the butter, please?
You know, however, with the Xbox One, I can control my entire entertainment system using voice commands. Up until now, I've had to use Leonard.
Get the other one. Pass the butter.
Hang on. I don't feel like you're taking this dilemma seriously.
Fine, Sheldon. You have my undivided attention.
Okay, now, the PS4 is more angular and sleek looking.
No way.
It's true, but the larger size of the Xbox One may keep it from overheating.
You wouldn't want your gaming system to overheat?
No, you absolutely would not. And then furthermore, the Xbox One now comes with a Kinect included.
Included?
Yes. Not sold separately. Although the PS4 uses cool new GDDR5 RAM, while the Xbox One is still using the conventional DDR3 memory.
Why would they still be using DDR3? Are they nuts?
See, that's what I thought. But then they go and throw in an ES RAM buffer.
Who is it? Who's they?
Xbox.
You're kidding!
No, I am not. And this ES RAM buffer should totally bridge the 100 gigabit per second bandwidth gap between the two RAM types.
This is a nightmare. How will you ever make a decision?
See, I don't know. What should I do?
Please pass the butter!
Okay, so we move on to the final part. How should we teach this? What kind of pedagogical guides and resources are available? One of the problems is that there is kind of a lack of quality teaching resources. For example, textbooks rarely include much pragmatic information, and actually there's some serious shortcomings in specific features of dialogues. I could do a whole extra, topic on this. What I would say, though, is whenever you see a dialogue in a textbook, and if it strikes you as odd in any way, but you can't figure out why, it's probably some kind of pragmatic problem. So what are the solutions? Well, there are published pedagogical guides and collections for teachers. And so I'm going to just, show you some of them here. So here are some of the books, the Pragmatics Teaching Speech Acts, Pragmatics Teaching Natural Conversations. Those ones on the left come from TESOL, but they're available on Amazon. And I'll give you an example from one of these books. Also from the Pragmatic Special Interest Group, there's lots of pragmatic resources, and I would heartily recommend these particular 3 volumes. Pragtivities, the blue book. There's 64 different activities. So depending on what it is that you're trying to teach, there's lots of lessons. So each of these have examples of lesson plans. Usually, if you're trying to systematically, teach pragmatics, you should follow these kinds of pedagogical steps. First, it's a good idea to assess the familiarity that the students have. Find out if they already know in the second language the useful words that they're going to be able to do this, or maybe they already are good at this particular pragmatic issue. So do a diagnostic test, and this can be done in the form of a discourse completion test, which I'm going to show you an example in a minute. The second is awareness raising of the act and its modifiers. And so you could actually get the students to collect first language data in Japanese about this kind of situation or this act, and then translate into English and see how it could be done in English. Third one, form-focused instruction on the act and sequence. So you directly teach them about the strategies that they could use. The fourth step would be to get them to identify the act or the softness or the level of directness and so on. So if they can hear or see in writing something and identify, well, how polite is this? What level of politeness is this? This helps them to move to the last section, which is controlled or guided practice. So here's an example sequence that's from chapter 7 of the Orange Book. Teacher, you should lose some weight. This is advice giving. And so it starts with a diagnostic. It goes through the 5 steps. So in this diagnostic, you could give this to the students, and it says a situation. For example, it's not raining right now, but you know that a big storm is approaching. Your teacher, so your teacher is, superior to you, is about to leave without his umbrella. You think he hasn't heard about the storm. What would you say? And so you would give these situations, and you would get the students to fill in what they think would be appropriate to say in each situation. And then you can collect them and have a discussion about, whether they hit the mark or not. Next, the teacher would do a little mini lecture about directness levels. So if you're giving very direct advice, you could use the word should or had better. So you should carry an umbrella, or you had better take an umbrella. Now, whether this is appropriate for you to say to your professor or not is another story. In the case of softened, well, you could say you might want to carry an umbrella, or perhaps you would think about taking an umbrella. Yeah. The final one, indirect, you talk about a personal experience. You say, well, gee, last week I was caught outside without an umbrella and I wish I had brought one. Yeah. And so there's all sorts of different ways to give advice. In the case of this one, you have a series of situations described, and then the students would take a look at these or listen to these and decide, think about what makes the advice direct, or what makes the advice indirect, or what makes the advice softened. So for example, in the case of the first one, you're at a DVD rental shop with a friend. Your friend decides to rent a movie. You've already seen it. So you say, you should rent something more interesting. So the thing that makes this direct, of course, is the use of the word should. You should do something. Yeah. In the case of situation 3, just to show softened, every day you and your friend eat junk food after school. You now think it's unhealthy. You say, I think we should go on a diet. And so it was softened because you said, I think is softening the advice. Okay. So then you could get them to read these things, and they can actually have practice to determine the kind of directness level. Is it direct? Is it softened? Is it indirect? So for example, what would you use in this situation? Suggests that your English teacher shouldn't wear such strong cologne. You should not wear such strong cologne. Obviously, that's direct. You might want to try a lighter cologne that is indirect, and softened rather. And then the final one, indirect. Many of my friends have allergies to cologne, so I never wear it. Okay. All right. And so on. There's all these different possibilities to try. A final identifying directness levels, you could get the students to actually listen to these conversations. The first thing, of course, is to figure out which picture is being talked about. And then they listen to the interaction and figure out, is the advice direct, softened, or indirect? Okay. And because of time, I'm not going to play that. The final one, where they're finally having a chance to produce advice, you could do, again, another discourse completion task in written form. So a 5-day holiday is coming up. Your oral communication teacher, who's recently moved into the area, is planning to drive to a vacation spot. You know the highways will be very crowded. What would be your advice to the teacher? Yeah, as you might want to get up and drive early in the morning, for example. Okay, and so intercultural, pragmatic, and interactional competence. This is actually another way to organize and think about how to teach. Oops, go back here. And this is very short, so it's worth seeing.
Pragmatics is the study of language and the way that we interpret and communicate meaning. In second languages, this is the way that that meaning is communicated across different languages or differently in each of the languages that you speak. For example, did you know that when making a request in some languages, we need expressions that are hearer-oriented, like, could you hand me the book? But in others, we need more speaker-oriented. Could I have the book? Understanding meaning can help limit miscommunication and help people from different cultures and languages communicate well in many different contexts.
The challenge with pragmatics can be that there are many patterns in language and also a huge amount of variety in individual speech and preferences. As language learners and teachers, we have to think of a way to capture all of that variety.
IPIC, or the IPIC model, stands for Intercultural, Pragmatic, and Interactional Competence. In other words, a model which captures all of these different components.
It incorporates both general patterns of language as well as individual, local, and community preferences.
This model of pragmatics is made of 4 equally important parts: knowledge, analysis, subjectivity, and awareness. We'll look at each one to learn more. Knowledge represents the structures that the learner has acquired in the language. This might be the grammar pieces, the specific vocabulary, different semantic formula. For example, in a greeting, this might be a list of all the ways you could say hello, hi, hello, good evening, etc. Analysis refers to the learner's ability to understand the impact or consequences of their language choices and make choices about which of the knowledge structures to use. In other words, with greetings, which one of these greeting sequences in the whole list should I pick for this context?
Subjectivity references the learner's ability to make conscious language choices and explain how they make those. For example, I'd really like to be more formal. I know my professor said to use his first name, but I'd really like to use a different greeting. Finally, awareness refers to if language learners can recognize the language choices of others and the meanings and consequences of what they say. Also, it includes the ability to react when learners notice something has gone wrong or gone really well.
Can you think of ways you could incorporate ideas from IPIC into your teaching context or your own language learning experience? Maybe you want to build knowledge and practice analysis skills by using popular language learning apps to compile lists of greetings and think about which contexts are most appropriate for each greeting type. Or maybe to develop your subjectivity skills, you watch YouTube videos in the target language of party invitations and think of what you might say and why in the same situation. Or maybe you develop awareness skills by searching for apologies in the target language and watching for different cues that those apologies have gone well or poorly. As a reminder, the IPIC model is one way to think about second language pragmatics. It stands for intercultural, pragmatic, and interactional competence. In other words, IPIC is a way to combine the 4 elements of knowledge, analysis, subjectivity, and awareness to ensure optimal communication across the languages you speak, different varieties of languages, and different speaker preferences.
Okay, so the final how-to are guidelines for materials development. One that I worked on, and this was in a book that was published by Routledge, and the editor was Naoko Taguchi, looking at this kind of development. So first, it's important to identify what it is that you want to teach, the developmental target, what kind of pragmatic needs that the learners have, and what is their context. And then the second part is to plan the components. You need to think about finding ways to engage the students and let them study and then activate their production, okay? And so, you know, you can do this in any order, but as long as you keep moving between engagement, study, activation, maybe study again, engagement, activate, and so on. You know, you can use these in an endless loop. I've prepared a website called pragmaterials.org, and you're welcome to come and use the materials there anytime. If you take a look under the speech app links, they're alphabetically ordered, and I've got quite a number. This is just some of them. Lots of different speech acts, and I've found links to not only research, but also people's suggestions for how to teach each of these speech acts. I also have links to corpora. So it's important to have, you know, language available for analysis if you decide to go that way. So these are some of the corpora that are available. There's many more, of course, and there's a longer list. I just took a screenshot. Also a database link. So movie scripts are also very useful to mine for examples of different kinds of speech acts. I've come to the end of my time. There's a lot more that I would like to share with you, but I think that I'm going to have to stop because we have more things going on this afternoon. So thank you very much. I know that it's a lot to take in a very short period of time, and I hope that, you know, even a small part of this has been useful for you.
Thank you very much. Oh, somebody's raised a hand. Maybe there's a question.
Go ahead, Sruta-san.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I'd raised my hand.
Oh, no
Donna,
problem.
thank you so much. It was
Okay.
a wonderful review of everything that I had kind of learned through conversation and analysis as well. So my question actually is about that. In order for our learners to understand pragmatics, especially for younger learners, do you think that studying informal conversation acts may be a start?
Oh, sure. Why not? I mean, you know, one thing that I want students to do is start for them to pay attention to what's going on in their daily lives and let them notice that depending on who says things, things might be different. And so I'll give you an example from, you know, something that I've done with college students. Maybe that's not going to help your, you know, elementary students or not. But so for example, you know, I remember at Denny's, you could get a second cup of coffee if you asked for it, right? And so I'd sent out students to spend, a couple hours in the afternoon to Denny's. And I say, look, just sit there and keep a little note of how people ask for their second cup. And what you need to make a note of is the gender of the person, asking the approximate age of the person, and then what they actually said in Japanese. Just spend time and just make that whole list. And then, everybody go to a different Denny's or a different family restaurant, and let's put it all together next time you come to class. And so what they started to find was that there were differences, certainly, when you have the older Japanese gentleman, he might just say, I don't want to embarrass myself by the way that I say it, but he might just raise the glass and or the cup and indicate to the waitress to come and give him a refill. And then, but then you get the mid-20s young woman would say, could I have a second cup, or if you don't mind, or if you have time, or next time you come by, this kind of thing. So there were lots of variations in how people were asking for their second cup of coffee, and it depended to a certain degree on their gender, their age, their position, next to the waitress, and so on. And so by seeing this wide amount of variation in Japanese, and then I say, okay, how would we express all of these different ways of asking for a second cup of coffee in English? And see if those would map, appropriately or not. And so that's kind of a nice way to do it. If they really start to see the variation that's happening in Japanese, and then encouraged to, see that variation in English, then that helps. Our main problem in the classroom is that everybody's supposed to be equal and friends, right? We don't have situations where we have superiors in the classroom. So the students don't get the opportunity to practice that level of politeness, right? So sometimes you have to manufacture that situation and just say, okay, you're going to be doing a job interview, and this student is going to be, the interviewer, and you're going to be going for the interview, right? So we have to, put it on, and so they can practice this.
Wonderful ideas. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry, just to jump in. The presentations in room 1 and room 2 are going to start in about 3 minutes. So if anybody would like to go and watch those presentations, please go ahead. If anybody wants to stay and continue this discussion with Professor Tatsuki, then like I mentioned before, this room will remain open. Okay,
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Yeah.